Welcome to the Char Chit Chat, a podcast exploring all things biochar related, coming to you from a small sheep and tree farm in the deep south of New Zealand. Hi Dale, thanks for joining me today. I'd like to start like I always do and ask, who is Dale Redpath?
Thanks, Dylan. I'm Dale Redpath, and I grew up in the Waiwaki Gorge on a sheep and beef farm. And my dad actually got into propagating hazelnut trees in the 80s when farming went through a lot of issues.
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of looked at growing nuts as a kind of crop that could store. We're like 40 minutes from a Potiki. I actually live in a Potiki at the moment, working there, and hour and a half from Gisborne. In the middle of the gorge is like surrounded by native bush, and there's a farming family where our family has farmed since 1907, I think, way
Mm-hmm.
back then. And we've been farming there since. My dad propagated hazelnut trees. Yeah, at first he thought he'd do the nuts, but then saw an opportunity with the hazelnut trees because our climate's a bit humid for good nut production. Yeah, so that's what I've grown up with is farming and horticulture and on a family farm. And we all want to keep the farm going in the family. And so I've always been thinking of like how to keep it going and how to make it viable. And yeah, at first my thought was to graze it, but it needs a lot of fencing and it's kind of marginal land. And there's so many trees growing everywhere. So my dad planted a lot of trees. He collected a lot of trees. He had a hazelnut nursery. Then on the hillside, there's a lot of manuka and tree fern and stuff coming back. And so to actually farm that requires clearing the trees, turning it into grass, and putting up fences. It's quite a big area. And, it would take millions of dollars of fencing and a lot of maybe fertilizer and stuff to actually make it work and quite a formidable goal. And so I've always been thinking of like how to grow fencing, like produce fencing ourselves. Tree you can make fencing out of trees, and we can grow
Mm.
trees. And then also the biochar fitted into that really nicely because we can cut the manuka and burn the branches into biochar, put them on the soil. And so our soil is like volcanic pumice and lipoli and stuff. So it's very free draining and quite infertile. And because biochar holds everything in the soil and for maybe thousands of years, it seemed like a perfect opportunity, really, because in order to keep it in grass, basically managing the land means managing the trees, and which means chopping them down, and I may as well get something useful out of them. So, maybe I could sell the firewood or make charcoal out of them. Biochar would be a great addition for the land. So, as you clear the trees to allow light for the grass to grow, you're also adding biochar to the soil. And if we plan on keeping the land in the family, then it just makes a lot of sense to add biochar and it would, permanently increase the fertility and the ability of the soil to hold on to nutrients, which it really struggles with. Not to mention, like a bit of ash is good on our soil and everything. So,
Mm.
a big part of what I'm doing in my life is figuring out how to make that work. And so, I've started a little business called Rivendale Wood, and I'm doing a bunch of different products to grow coppice chestnuts for fencing so that we have our own fencing and don't have to buy it. Like we grow so many trees and it just seems kind of crazy to buy a tree trunk for like $70 when we could grow a lot of tree trunks and harvest them for free. And
Mm.
chestnut is one thing to do. So as I was clearing a spot to plant some chestnuts, I ended up with all these branches and bits of wood, and there was like firewood, and we could chip the wood into wood chips, but there's actually quite a lot of work to handle each branch and put it into the chipper and wait until it's chipped up. And sometimes it gets stuck, and you got to
Yep.
fiddle around with it,
Yep.
uses fossil fuels. And then I was experimenting with biochar, and I found it was an incredibly easy way to deal with all these masses of branches that I was getting from all these trees that were being chopped down. And I was thinking, these trees had grown for like 30 odd years or so. And it's just such a shame to kind of waste them and let them rot or turn them into firewood. So if I could at least capture some of that value and use it on the farm to permanently improve some of the soil for the future, that seemed like a really good idea. But then I was making biochar and giving it to my mum for a garden, and she ended up getting too much, and so I gave it to a cousin of mine, and then I gave it to friends, and then everybody had too much biochar. So then I decided to try selling it, and some people bought it, and then I took it to market, and so I ended up selling a whole lot of biochar from these branches of the trees that I chopped down, and I ended up selling about $1,000 or $2,000 worth, and I bought myself a little chainsaw, so I didn't have to borrow Dad's chainsaw all the time and ask him, "Hey, Dad, can I borrow your chainsaw?" And no, he's using it. So
Mhm.
I was really stoked to be able to just cut down all these trees, turn them into biochar, and kind of get a little bit of cash to kind of go some way towards paying for some of the work that I was doing, buy some equipment and pay for the trees. It sort of funded itself a little bit, which was
Mm.
quite nice. On top of all the benefits I'll get from the chestnut. And yeah, and other things I'm doing like mushroom logs, growing edible mushrooms, using some of the bigger wood that I'm getting from cutting trees down, and making barbecue charcoal, biochar from all the waste, and some hazel bean poles, and basically whatever else I can come up with. It looks like there could actually be a decent amount of value there, which means that it could be those products, which I thought were just kind of making use of a waste product, they might actually be worth doing as the main thing. They seem to be quite, interesting and popular and valuable. So
Mhm.
maybe I'll grow a whole lot of coppice trees for, mushroom logs and biochar and stuff. And so that's sort of what I'm doing, and it's sort of a bit of who I am, really. Oh, and I also studied ecology and plant biology at Massey University, and spent a few years traveling around the country working in the bush, doing vegetation monitoring plots for the Lucas project, which is about measuring the carbon change in New Zealand's natural forests. And so there's like an 8 kilometre grid of these plots, and they measure them every 5 years or so. We went to some pretty cool places and some pretty crazy places, like on the edge of a cliff or something, in people's gardens sometimes. Yeah, all over the place. And we were just measuring the trees, and the government people would be analysing the data and working out how much carbon was actually being sequestered in the vegetation plots. Yeah.
Mhm. So is your dad finished doing the hazel farming? Like, is he finished with the nursery?
Oh, he's still going. Yeah, he isn't like fully retired, but he's in his retirement years. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, he's still going. So yeah, he used to be. He was in the Tree Crops Association. He's in the
Hmm.
Hazelnut Growers Association. Yeah, he's one of the leading people in New Zealand for hazelnut growing. So
Yeah. So has he then, that's basically been his number one income, has been selling hazelnut trees to other people who are setting up orchards and stuff.
yeah, between that and the livestock,
Okay.
some years, one is better than the other, but he says it's been really good to have both incomes here. But yeah, the Hazel Nursery has been a big part of his income for a long time.
Okay. So
Mm.
can you tell me about the nursery? Because I'm interested in nurturing myself and growing trees and plants and so on. Does he grow them from seed, or does he have some large trees and then he takes, the little suckers that come up that grow around each tree and then transplant those into pots and stuff? Or what's his process?
Oh yeah, so he propagates them using stool beds. He does grow some seedlings, and he's kind of been trying to find some better seedling varieties for New Zealand. And so he's
Hmm.
planted out seedlings and hedgerows, but to propagate the trees that he has for sale of known varieties, named varieties, he
Hmm.
basically gets a hazelnut stump and cuts it back or coppices it, and all these little shoots regrow in the spring. And when they reach a certain stage, he mounds up with something like sawdust or compost or potting mix or something
Mm-hmm.
around the stool. Even dirt can work. And they grow roots over the summer. And then in the winter, he kind of pulls them off. And sometimes he sells them like that, but he usually would plant them out in a row to grow better roots. And then he'd dig them up in a year or two and bring them up and bring the roots and everything, and then bundle them up and send them off, bare rooted.
Cool. So have you tried to convince him to use biochar in his nursery and use that as a mix, maybe mixed with the dirt or mixed with the sawdust to make around the stools?
Yeah, well, funny you should say that because I hadn't remembered that. But when I was making biochar, I did have a go at there were some hazels that he wanted propagated in sort of the area of the old nursery that I was renovating, and so he kind of got me to chop down the trees and then mound them up and propagate from them. And I had to go with using like a biochar mix and then just straight biochar. And I asked him to kind of let me know how the biochar went. And he reckoned that there was as much rooting with the biochar only as with soil or potting mix or whatever it was I used, which, sounds like maybe there's no benefit to the biochar in that case. So he would often use the wood chip from all his chipping, from all his branches and stuff. He'd kind of use that to help mound up the stool beds.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the wood chips break down over time, and so does potting mix and everything. And so I reckon that the biochar, it doesn't break down. So if we kept on adding biochar to these stool beds, then eventually you wouldn't really need to import any media. Like I remember he got a truckload of sawdust from a sawmill. I think it was pine sawdust. And I remember this huge pile of sawdust showing up in the nursery, and we had to move it with the wheelbarrows to all the stool beds. But of course, over time, that all rots. So I think starting with the biochar mix and keeping on adding biochar until it's basically all biochar would be a really good idea, because you wouldn't have to use media that kind of breaks down all the time. I've given him some of the coarser stuff that I sift out to use, and he was chipping it, but he found that it kind of gathered in the bottom of the chipper. Yeah.
And can you give us an idea of what scale his nursery is at? Like how many approximately trees would he sell per year?
Well, I think he wanted to do about 10,000 trees a year. That was his
Okay.
goal when I was talking to him about it.
Yeah.
There's about a hectare of old nursery, but obviously that's old nursery, so it's not all in production. Yeah.
I'm a fan of coppice agroforestry type stuff. I'm planting a lot of willows myself, quite a lot of hazels,
Mm,
about to plant a whole lot of poplar as well, because I
mm,
see that's the future. You're complaining that
yeah.
you've got too many trees, but I,
Yeah.
I love having lots of trees, and I think that if you can grow trees on your land, then there is fertility there. It's just
Mm,
the fertility is probably down deeper, and that's probably why the grasses don't grow as well, because the fertility's been washed down and leached further down into the soil profile. But roots
mm,
of trees can go down so deep and then bring that back up. And then what you're doing is perfect, finding the uses for all those different tree products. And there's, potentially hundreds of different products that you could get out of
mm,
a treed landscape compared to just getting sheep, cattle, maybe some goats out of a grassy type farming situation. But I think the potential for forested landscapes is way larger and way more interesting.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So one of the things I want to do is kind of get more farmers to plant trees on their farms. A
Mm.
lot of people want to do that anyway, but I've learned a lot about permaculture, and I got a permaculture design certificate
Hmm.
a couple of years ago, And I really love permaculture because it's really like applied ecology. I studied ecology. So when I learned about sustainable agriculture or permaculture or any of these things, to me, it's like, well, yeah, that's how an ecosystem works. It's not like I'm just growing a hydroponic tomato plant, which is where a
Mm.
lot of the conventional sort of agricultural thinking comes from, as more like a food chain, whereas ecology is more like a food web and looking at how everything fits together. And one of the kind of principles in permaculture is that to always obtain a yield. And I see a lot of people doing a lot of work to say control weeds or something, and they don't get anything out of it. It's
Yeah.
just an expense. Like, mowing the lawn is a good example. It's like you got to mow your lawn all the time. You don't necessarily get any value out of it. But if you have a garden, you can turn that all into compost, use it as mulch, and you can, I think the ideal ratio of lawn to garden for a section would probably be as much lawn as you can feed your garden with. If you have too much lawn, what are you going to do with the lawn clippings? You've got to get rid of them. You can have heaps of garden, as much as you can manage, but then you can harvest the lawn clippings and apply them into your garden. That's what I think. So yeah, some people like just spray manuka or tree ferns or whatever weeds are growing on their farm, and but you can turn those into biochar at least, if not something else. And a lot of our environmental issues can be solved on farms, I think, because farmers manage most of the land. So
Mm.
farmers are really the key to a lot of our issues. But to grow trees on farms, you kind of need to integrate them in a sensible way. So you need to get some benefit from them, even if it's just the shade, or maybe timber. But you end up with a lot of branches, and most people just pile these up into a pile and light it into a bonfire which smokes for days and days, and they
Mm.
gotta watch it over those days, and they, at the end of it all, they only there's a bit of ash and they don't really get anything out of it. They've just It's an expense. It costs money and time to monitor the fire. But if they could turn it into biochar, then it would be quicker, it would be cleaner, and they could also use the biochar, which is a very valuable product. And that's one of the hurdles to using biochar in agriculture, is the cost of it, because to apply it over all your hectares is going to cost a lot of money. But if you've already got trees and branches that you're burning or getting rid of, you can make the biochar. So I think that to get trees in the rural landscape, biochar is a really key piece, because this is how we can kind of draw down some of this carbon, and at the same time improving the soil and the farming productivity. And it's a use for the branches, because whenever you get trees, you get branches, and they're a
Mm.
bit of a pain to deal with. So to be able to deal with them by making biochar at a farm scale is really what I want to contribute to the rural landscape. And you're right, there's a lot of potential for trees, and yeah, I'm looking at finding some farmers to kind of plant some forests, and especially some coppice forests. And but there's also agroforestry like honey locusts and poplars, and ash trees would be really good to use in agroforestry. Yeah, and then you get the biochar and all these other things from the trees. Yeah, there's a lot of potential.
Yeah. So Dale, please tell us what you remember about when biochar first came into your awareness. Like, where did you first learn about it or get to know it?
Yeah, I think I may have read about it in the book Deep Jungle, which I came across in a bookstore at university.
Hmm.
And I think they mentioned Terra Preta, but I came across Terra Preta later on somewhere. And then I was learning about biochar, and I actually had a go at making it using the instructions in the Coing and Garden Guide. And I
Hmm.
used like an old drum that had some holes in and a lot of corrugated iron. And I wasn't 100% sure if I had done it properly. And I put some pine branches in, and I got some biochar and some ash, and I was like, I don't know, did I do it properly? I'm not sure. And then, yeah, things really took off when I came across the channel Skill Cult on YouTube, and this guy was just burning a massive pile of huge branches, lighting a fire at the top, and he also had a trench method where he dug a trench and then like started a fire and kept on adding branches. And
Mm.
I thought, man, I can do that. That looks really easy and simple. And so I gave that a go.
Yeah. So do you know what year that would have been?
I've made my first batch about 2013,
Uh-huh.
but I tried Skill Cult's method in 2015, and I've been making biochar since then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is your favorite method of making biochar? Are you digging a trench every time you want to burn branches, or are you just doing a burn pile, on the normal soil surface?
Well, I was doing piles because I was able to kind of tidy up the branches, stack them up, and then they dry over the summer, and I'd burn them in the autumn.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I quite like that method because it's actually really quick. I was able to make about 100 liters or more in an hour, and I just used about 60 liters of water in a watering can and a rake to kind of rake it out. I sort of got it down to a fine art, but I've since moved on to a different method, mainly because it creates some pretty huge flames.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I think one flame plume that I had, I reckon it was probably about 10 meters tall. I thought I had plenty of room. It was under a big alder tree, and I thought I had plenty of room, but the flames went right up into the tree and they didn't burn. But I felt bad about hurting Dad's tree. Yeah, but it was the biggest flame plume I've ever seen. I think it was a big updraft and it was really
Yeah.
skinny and it went up. It was amazing. My pile was about 2 meters tall, and it was really dry wood, and it just
Yeah.
went a lot higher than the other ones had.
Okay.
So what I do now, my favorite method, I've been using 3 pieces of corrugated iron. I make 2 walls. I get 6 iron standards or waratahs, and I ran them into the ground in a straight line, and I put 1 piece of corrugated iron on each side. So I do the standards in 2 rows, either side of a piece of corrugated iron on the ground, and that's my floor, which I suppose you don't need, but it's really it kind of keeps the biochar clean, which is really good if I'm selling it. And so
Okay.
I've got 2 walls of corrugated iron held up by 3 waratahs each, and I kind of the end ones go on the outside, and the middle ones go on the inside of the waratah, so they're kind of
Hmm.
woven in a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I just light a fire in there, and I add branches gradually, and then I end up building a big mound of embers in the middle. And then what I used to do was put it out with a hose, and it took a lot of water and a lot of time, and I had to put the whole lot out all at once, sort of thing. But what I've learned is I can just get a shovel full of embers and put it into a bin of water, and then put it out. And when that bin is getting full, I scoop it out and put it into another bin with drain holes to drain off. And I hosted Luke Bredon from the UK. He came over on a Nuffield scholarship to look at biochar and agriculture. And he was keen on seeing what I was doing. So we had a go, and we were able to make, I think, 125 litres an hour continuously. So yeah, I can take embers from one end, douse them, and build up the other end with branches. And then when the other end is turned to embers, I go around and empty that out while building up the other side. So I can keep doing that all day. And I'd like to make a video about that so I can show people how to do it.
So you're basically then making it above the ground trench, but it doesn't have ends on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
I started with ends, and I think it's actually more efficient, but it kind of got in the way of the branches. Like the branches have been bended down, and having the ends off means I can put on big, massive branches of any length, really.
Yeah.
And when they burn through in the middle, I just pick them up and put the rest of it on.
Yeah.
And and that's been really good for like sometimes I've cut down big areas of trees and I haven't kind of tidied up the branches. And with this method, I can clean up the branches. And as I gather up branches to tidy them up, I can actually just put them straight on the fire. And so then you only need to handle them once,
Yeah.
you
I
know.
like it.
Yeah, rather than like,
Have
yeah.
you patented a name for it?
No, maybe I should.
Yeah, I haven't
But
heard of
no, I
anyone
think,
doing this method. I think you've come up with a new method.
yeah, well,
Unless you saw it on
I
YouTube and
was
you've stolen it from someone else.
I did kind of see Edible Acres on YouTube. There's a channel, Edible Acres, and they were using like a roll of corrugated aluminium, I think. So the corrugations were going along the strip, like crossways to the length of it, so they could roll it out. Whereas most roofing iron, you got the length of iron, and the corrugations go down the length, so you can't really bend it anyway. But yeah, he had like a roll of corrugated aluminium and made like a big, yeah, like in a trench above the ground, and he filled it up. And I thought, hey, that looks really good. So I tried it with the iron and it worked really well. But then I took the ends off. I think it's a bit less efficient, but way more practical. And one of the things that put me off learning how to make biochar was everybody was really great engineers apparently, and I wasn't. And so everyone was like making these double drums and welding things, and I didn't have a welder and didn't know
Yeah.
how to weld. And then at the end of the day, they've only got that volume of stuff they can process.
Yeah.
And you can have multiple drums and everything. And I saw people using wood chips, but then you have to turn it into wood chips first. Yeah, so this is the thing that Skill Cult mentioned in his videos was, yeah, his method might not be the most efficient, but he has a whole lot of branches he has to get rid of. I think he's in like Oregon or somewhere, and they have to manage the fuel load in the forest.
Mm.
So every year he has to get rid of these branches somehow. And so maybe he only gets a third of the biochar that he would if he were to put it into drums like a retort. But he can process the whole thing all at once, and it takes a couple of hours, and then he's done. So getting the most out of your residues is one side of things, but for a lot of people like farmers and so forth, it's really important just to get rid of the waste. And if you can do it quicker, this is why people just burn it, and they actually invest time to just burn it just so they can get rid of it. So my situation was that I didn't have a lot of money and I didn't have a huge amount of time. So yeah, being able to process massive amounts of branches for no money, like basically, a shovel, a watering can, a rake, and 60 liters of water, was a real big draw card. And I could make like really quite decent amounts of biochar. Yeah.
Yeah,
With
125
really quickly.
liters in an hour, you said, right?
Yeah. And now that was with two people,
Two
but there was
people.
one fire going. And I reckon I could probably manage two fires. So that would be potentially, I think the hold up would be moving the branches. So if you had them all stacked up there would be ideal. But if I had two fires, that could be 250 liters an hour.
Okay.
Um,
And
yeah,
then
I can probably manage.
what would you sell 100 liters for?
Well, I was doing when I was at the markets, I was selling 20 liters for $20, and then I went up to $40. And I mean, in the garden centers, you can buy powdered biochar. Like it's a lot finer than what I do, but you can buy powdered biochar for $15 a liter,
Wow.
which I think is if I was able to sell biochar for $15 a liter, then I would be very wealthy, I think.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
then you're making pretty good money per hour.
Yeah, yeah. 125 liters times $15 would be
Yeah.
our times 250 liters an hour. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of potential there. But, when you mentioned patenting the method, I have thought, oh, maybe I should keep this to myself so no one else can produce it as efficiently as I can. But I think this is kind of my public good. Like, I think more people should know how to do this. And that's why I want to make a video, because if all the farmers knew how to do this, then tomorrow, because it's winter, they could just start making biochar 125 liters an hour. And they
Mm.
could make, I don't know what the density of it is, but one farmer might be able to make a ton of biochar in a day. And he could start doing it tomorrow if they knew how to.
Yeah.
And yeah, just from branches that are lying around. And most people already have the gear that you need: corrugated iron, waratahs, a shovel. I bought a mud shovel which has holes in it, and that's been extremely useful because the water drains out and it makes everything a lot easier. And yeah, some plastic bins. Like I had a so when I made 400 liters of biochar, I think I used about 100 liters of water. So I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's super
But
efficient. Yeah.
so one of the things for farmers is one of the things I found was having hose access. So if you can carry 5 20 litre containers of water on a quad bike or a tractor or something, if you had a tractor, you could carry all of the stuff, maybe in the bucket even, and you could just take it wherever your branches are, maybe even way up the hill. You know, there's the poplar and willow group are looking at, they're trying to get farmers to plant poplars and willows on hill country. But of course, are you going to have a hose there? Are you going to be able to move a big container unit up there? Probably not. So to be able to feed out the branches to animals and then turn them into biochar on site, like on the side of a hill, would be really useful. So I think having this real micro scale is really important, as well as the big industrial things. I watched a country calendar years ago, a country calendar episode, and it was a vineyard in Marlborough, and they had invested in a $55,000 gasifier to make biochar. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, I don't have $55,000, so I'm gonna think of some other way to make it. Yeah, so my corrugated iron is something that I can do.
Yeah. No, it's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I wasn't really meaning patent. It probably is not the right word either. It's probably more you can have naming rights on it and give it a
yeah,
name
yeah,
that
yeah.
you know. So the
Yeah.
one that you had seen with the corrugated iron going the other way, would that be more like a an old corrugated water tank or something?
I think this is in America, and they must have different sorts of corrugated metal than we do. I
Okay.
haven't seen anything like it. Yeah, I'd like to. It'd be great to get my hands on some of that. Like a roll of corrugated aluminium would be really useful.
I don't think
Um,
it'll be aluminium. I think it must be steel still because aluminium melts
yeah.
at quite a low temperature. I made that mistake and
Oh, okay.
I had an I thought it was a flue pipe, flue tube, and we're
Right.
making rocket stoves, and we put
Mm.
this pipe inside a rocket stove, and it was going really well. And then all of a sudden, after, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or so, it didn't burn so well anymore. And then I looked inside, and inside where the burn chamber was, it had all just melted.
Wow.
So, yeah, I looked it up, and aluminium melts at like 600 degrees or something. So,
Oh well. Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't
Oh, it
last.
probably was an aluminium then.
Yeah.
Um,
All right. If a stranger asks you what biochar is, what do you tell them?
yeah. Well, I've been developing this over the years, and now what I tell people is that if you think of a charcoal filter and you put water through it and you get clean water coming out the
Mhm.
bottom, and all the excess nutrients and microbes and all that sediment and everything is held up in the charcoal filter. Biochar is like a charcoal filter in the soil. So it kind of
Yeah.
holds on to everything,
Uh-huh.
and including water and nutrients and microbes, and it kind of stops everything from washing out through the soil. And it's something that, because it doesn't break down, nothing really eats it, and that means that it lasts in the soil for ages. So it's like a permanent addition to the soil fertility.
Okay. Cool. Thank you for that.
And yeah, yeah, it's like a type of charcoal. Yeah,
Yeah.
because people don't really seem to know what it is. Well, yeah, they haven't heard of it.
Well, I think nowadays even people don't know what charcoal is because there's probably a generation or so that have been used to just having a gas barbecue.
Yeah, well, that's true. I came across someone and, I was telling them a bit about what I do for my business, and they didn't realize that charcoal was made of wood. So,
Oh, okay. Yep.
yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of people just have no reason to think about this stuff, really.
Yeah. Okay. The next question I have for you is, what do you think is needed in New Zealand to make biochar household topic?
I think it needs to be relevant to people. Like, not everyone just collects a whole lot of useless information. So, if it's not relevant to people, then there's no reason for them to know about it.
Hmm.
I think one of the real opportunities for biochar is that it's probably the most accessible way that ordinary people can contribute to reversing climate change.
Hmm.
Like, you can grow trees, but to counteract your emissions for 1 year, you need to plant, say, a hectare of trees. But then the next year, you need to plant another hectare of trees. And that forest of that hectare of trees has to never be cut down and never disappear. So every year you need to add forest for the emissions you release. And
Hmm.
at some point, there's not enough land to just keep planting trees. And then if something happens to it, obviously the carbon goes back into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
But we can keep growing trees, turning them into biochar, regrowing the trees, turning those trees into biochar. And, even if we just dump the biochar in the ocean, that would be able to reverse climate change and take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And I actually think there's an opportunity in every cloud, there's a silver lining. And where all this fossil carbon has been underground, inaccessible, now it's in the atmosphere, there's actually an opportunity to extract all that carbon and put it into our soils to make the soils more fertile. And biochar is probably the best way to do that because it's so durable.
Yeah.
So if we could take the carbon emissions down to pre-industrial levels and turn it into biochar, we could actually increase the fertility. We could make previously unproductive areas into productive food producing regions. We could feed the world. And the cool thing about biochar is that you can actually see it, you can measure it, you can hold it, and it's not 100% carbon, but let's say it's 80% carbon and you got a kilo of it. Well, that is 800 grams of carbon that has been sequestered, which is 3.6 times more carbon dioxide. And so I'm kind of disappointed that biochar is not in the carbon credit system because it's actually a way easier to measure and more durable than a forest. So someone could buy biochar and actually contribute to reversing climate change. And I think one area that biochar could be relevant to households is, yeah, if you've got a garden, that's great, but not everyone has a garden. But if you could add it to food scraps, that would actually probably reduce methane emissions when it goes to landfill. And it would also reduce the smell from food scraps. And then you could, if you've got a worm farm or a compost or chooks, you can feed your food scraps with a biochar to that. But that's one way that everyday people could really tangibly contribute to reversing climate change. I think that would be one way you could get biochar to be a household topic. And I suppose if people talked about climate change a lot more and they knew more about biochar, they would probably talk about biochar because it's such an important piece of the climate change puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think now people are almost too scared to talk about it, and people are probably avoiding the topic now. I mean, there was a time when climate change, was readily talked about very frequently, and now I think people have kind of given up in a way. And
Yeah. Do you
I
think it
think we
was before?
missed.
Do you think it was before the pandemic that people were talking about climate change?
Yes, it was. And I think that the youth doing their climate strikes and stuff, I think that was getting
Mm,
very strong and very powerful. And the pandemic basically pulled the rug out from underneath all of that very quickly.
yeah. Yeah, we've
And
had
hasn't really
massive
seemed to start up
inconvenience.
again. But
Yeah,
I also think that the
yeah,
climate movement could have done a lot more in offering everybody lots of little things that they could all do, like
Yeah,
just avoiding plastic and taking your own shopping bag to the grocery and recycling a little bit. That's nowhere near enough. We actually need lots of other small things that
yeah,
people can do. And the biochar fits so well into that, with composting your own
yes,
food waste for one, taking a little bit of responsibility and having a little worm farm or a little compost in the corner somewhere, the simple things like that.
yeah. That's right. So where was it? It was a farm forest grower, I think it's called, the magazine of the Farm Forestry Association.
Hmm.
And an article was saying in there that if farmers planted 10% of their land in forests, that would New Zealand would be carbon neutral. So I
Yeah.
think that biochar is really important because even if we have zero emissions, we're still going to experience global warming throughout the world. So, and I remember in 2019 or whatever it was, and we basically had 2 years or something to completely eradicate fossil fuels. And I was just like, there's no way that's going to happen.
Yeah.
No, everyone's going to work and people aren't prepared to just go cold turkey on this cheap energy. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, but if there was enough tree growth to balance out the emissions, and then you turned that into biochar, if there was enough biochar being drawn down, potentially we could actually carry on the way we are. Yeah, biochar is such an accessible, especially in New Zealand, such an accessible way to address the climate change issue. And I really don't like all this sort of complaining and trying to get the government to tell everyone what to do. It's like, what are we going to do? End of the day, government can only do so much. And so I just thought it was way better for me to just go straight to the farmers and say, hey, look, here's how you can turn all your branches into biochar, and it's a good thing. And you can increase the production of your farm and the health of your animals. And just forget about getting the government involved because, from what I've seen, the government is very slow and cumbersome and not particularly innovative. Whereas at a farm level, you don't really need nationwide strategies. You just need to know what to do on your farm.
Mm.
So, so I figured it was better to go directly to farmers
Yeah, and I
and
mean, if we know climate change is coming and it's coming quite quickly, I think biochar gives us an option to actually really prepare for that.
yeah,
Like if a farmer starts planting fast-growing things like willows and poplars, in 3 years he can be already coppicing that, turning it into biochar and putting that into the soil, and he can start now. And in, say,
yeah,
10 years' time, he will already have put in several tons of char into the ground, and then that makes his soil grow better grass. Yeah, it's a way to actually get preparing for when we do have longer dry periods, we do have wetter periods. Having that char in the soil is kind of our buffer.
yeah. And yeah, imagine how long it would take to go through the government and get them to do a policy that kind of supports farmers to make biochar and educate them. It would take years,
Yeah.
and there's no need for it really. As long as people know how to do it, they can just go and do it. And also, this is the downfall of some of like the big industrial projects. And like if you have to invest $100,000 into a plant or something, that means only a few people are ever going to make biochar.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
they have like $100 of equipment, which you've probably already got, and
Most of
it's
it.
really easy. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone can make it. Yeah.
All right, Dale, when are you going to make this video and release it?
Well, I need a videographer. Yeah. So the person who made my last video was unavailable, which was a real shame because they did a really good job. Yeah. When I track down a videographer, and I have to do it in like the season when I can do fires.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm.
When
If you
is
know
your
someone,
next season for doing fires?
right now until about maybe November, October or something.
Okay. Well, hey, you can,
Yeah.
you've got another option as a tripod.
Well, yeah. I thought I could make a version one. Yeah, but my the guy last made my last video did a really good job, and I have taken some videos, but I kind of get distracted with actually doing the thing. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Oh, and I've got a DSLR camera and a tripod, and I thought I'd use that, but it seems to time out after 15 minutes. And then I have to go back and start
Oh,
recording again.
must
So
be a
I
setting
don't
for
know.
that somewhere, maybe.
Yeah,
I know it's a lot of
yeah,
work making video. Making high quality video takes a lot of editing and setting up. And these guys that do YouTube and they film a whole lot of stuff, I'm sure they retake stuff and redo it and redo it and take some days
oh
and
yeah,
days. Looks like it's all just
yeah,
done quickly, but it's a lot of work.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I have been pressured for my time off because I work in like agriculture and horticulture, so I work on fine days. And then
Hmm.
all this other stuff I need to do is also on fine days. So
Ah,
there's a lot of competition for fine days,
okay.
and so yeah, everything seems to happen on fine days, which is extremely annoying. But yeah, that's the way it is.
Yeah. Okay. We've got 2 minutes 40 left. I've got one
Oh,
final
yeah.
question. Do you want us to tell us a little bit about why you've got involved with the biochar network of New Zealand?
Oh, yeah. Well, mainly because I was asked to, but yeah, I wanted to network with other people doing biochar, and so that I can maybe find videographer or kind of advertise my biochar, or
Hmm.
yeah, just kind of reach the right people. Yeah, I was really doing it by myself. So it's nice to see other people are doing it.
Yeah,
And yeah, I can learn from people. And yeah, there's a lot of people who know a lot more than I do to learn from. So it's really good to be plugged into a network of like-minded people.
yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay, we've still got a minute 50. Anything else that you'd like to talk about in this chat?
Well, just
Okay.
everybody should be making biochar,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
and we need more trees on farms ideally. And I'm working on all of the above in my spare time, which I don't have much of, but yeah, I'm doing what I can.
And tell us what is the name of your website?
Rivendalewood.com. And I got a YouTube channel and Facebook and Instagram. And yeah, it'd be great if people can have a look at those things and get the views up so it gets more widely spread.
Yeah. And if there's any videographers out there
Oh yeah,
interested in helping the planet and helping the environment, please get in touch with myself or with Dale and yeah,
yeah,
sort out this video and get it out there. It'd be great to see a new technique and yes, let's spread it around.
yeah. That'd be great. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Dale, and sharing your journey with biochar so far. And thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, and thanks for the invitation. It's been really good.